please, I can explain everything. It was a mistake, I swear.
Save it for your lawyers.
Don't leave me like this. I'm begging you.
Banda. She was standing in Evelyn's kitchen, wearing Evelyn's robe. Not just any robe. The ivory silk anniversary robe Nathan had ordered from a boutique in Milan, the one he'd had monogrammed with a small cursive E near the collar, the one Evelyn had folded carefully in tissue paper and kept for occasions that never seemed to arrive. And this woman, young, barefoot, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, was standing at Evelyn's marble counter, pouring coffee into Evelyn's favorite ceramic mug like she owned every inch of it. She didn't flinch when she heard the front door open. She turned slowly, looked Evelyn up and down, and smiled. Not with embarrassment, not with guilt, but with the particular confidence of someone who had been there long enough to stop pretending she hadn't. If you've ever had the floor disappear beneath your feet while the room stayed perfectly still, you already know what Evelyn felt in that moment. Stay with us until the very end of this story. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. 1. Evelyn Carter had not planned to come home early. The conference in Boston had run 2 days short. The keynote speaker, some venture capitalist who had written a book about disruption and apparently needed 45 minutes to explain the cover, had been so aggressively tedious that the entire event had quietly, collectively, deflated by Thursday afternoon. Her colleague Dana had caught a 6 o'clock flight. Evelyn had sat in the hotel bar for an hour with a glass of wine she didn't finish, scrolling through her phone, reading nothing, before deciding that an empty hotel room in Boston was a worse option than her own bed in Manhattan. She hadn't texted Nathan. That wasn't unusual. He had a habit of responding to her messages 4 hours late with one word, sometimes two, and she had quietly stopped expecting otherwise sometime around the 3rd year of their marriage. She told herself it was just how he was, focused, driven, his mind always 3 chess moves ahead on whatever deal was consuming him that week. 9 years of telling herself that had made the explanation feel almost like truth. She took a car from the airport. She watched the bridge lights reflect off the river. She thought about nothing in particular. The apartment building on East 74th was quiet at 11:30 on a Thursday night. Pedro at the front desk waved without looking up from whatever he was reading. The elevator hummed. Evelyn leaned against the back wall with her carry-on at her feet and felt the particular low exhaustion that wasn't about sleep, the kind that lived somewhere behind your sternum and had no clean remedy. She heard the music before she reached the apartment door, low, ambient. Someone's playlist, not Nathan's taste, which ran towards silence or financial news radio depending on his mood. This was something softer. A woman's voice barely audible through the door. Evelyn stood in the hallway for a moment with her key in her hand. She almost talked herself into a story. Housekeeper. Nathan entertaining a client. He occasionally did late dinners at the apartment when he didn't want the exposure of a restaurant. His college friend Derek, who sometimes crashed in their guest room with no notice and questionable social awareness. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The living room was dim, 2 lamps on, a bottle of red wine on the coffee table. The good Bordeaux she'd been saving, the one Nathan knew was hers, with 2 glasses. One empty, one half full, both with lipstick on the rim, the same lipstick color. Evelyn's carry-on wheels made a small sound on the hardwood as she stopped walking. She heard something in the kitchen, a cabinet closing, water running briefly, then off. And then the woman walked out. She was maybe 26, 27, dark hair, olive skin, wearing the ivory silk robe with the cursive E near the collar, holding a ceramic mug in both hands like she was warming them. She had the kind of eyes that registered surprise without performing it. They widened slightly when she saw Evelyn, that was all. Then she did something that Evelyn would never entirely forget. She shifted her weight to one hip, tilted her head a fraction, and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one, a measured, composed smile, as if she had calculated the situation and determined that confidence was still the better hand to play. "You must be Evelyn," she said. 3 words, like she'd been briefed. Evelyn did not answer. She stood in her own living room with her carry-on beside her and looked at this woman in her robe, and understood, in a way that bypassed argument and settled directly into her bloodstream. Exactly what had been happening, and for how long it must have been happening for this woman to be standing here like this, in this robe, with this posture, saying you must be Evelyn, as if she'd been expecting the introduction eventually. Nathan came out of the hallway a moment later. He was in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers, hair uncombed, and he stopped walking the second he saw Evelyn. The color left his face in a way she had never seen before, not gradually, but all at once, like something had been switched off behind his eyes. He looked from her to the woman in the robe and back to Evelyn, and for a moment he just stood there, a man of 51 who had spent 30 years mastering the art of controlling rooms, and he couldn't produce a single syllable. "Nathan," Evelyn said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't sure why she wasn't screaming. Her body seemed to have decided on a different response, a kind of eerie, preternaturally calm, like the moment before a storm when the birds stop. "Evelyn, I don't." She held up one hand, not dramatically, just a hand. "Don't do whatever you were about to do." "I can explain." "I know you think you can." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've always believed you could explain your way through anything." The woman in the robe, she still hadn't moved, still had the mug in her hands, said nothing. Evelyn turned to look at her again, took in the robe one more time, the monogram. "That's mine," Evelyn said, almost conversationally. The woman looked down at herself. "Nathan said I could—" "I'm sure he did." Evelyn picked up the handle of her carry-on. "Keep it." She walked to the bedroom. She didn't rush. She turned on the lamp on her side of the bed, pulled her large suitcase from the upper shelf of the closet, and set it open on the mattress. She worked methodically, clothes she had owned before the marriage, the photographs from her parents' house that she'd kept on her nightstand, the journal she'd barely written in, the sheet music she'd carried from apartment to apartment since she was 19, dog-eared and annotated in pencil, a stack of compositions she hadn't touched in years, the small wooden box her mother had given her that had nothing of monetary value inside and everything of personal value. She left the jewelry, the earrings, the necklaces, the anniversary bracelet, the things he'd bought from stores where the salespeople didn't display price tags because the price wasn't meant to be the point. She left them all on the dresser in a small pile, not arranged, just set down, like she was clearing a surface she no longer needed. Nathan appeared in the doorway. "Evelyn, please." She was folding a sweater. She kept folding it. "You don't have to go anywhere tonight," he said. Can we just talk? She's leaving. Right now she's leaving." "I'm not angry about her leaving or staying," Evelyn said. She placed the sweater in the suitcase. "I'm not angry, actually. I think that's what's strange about this." "Then why are you packing?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, the way she hadn't in a while. Not the glance across a dinner table or the half attention of someone who has stopped expecting a conversation to surprise them. She looked at him like she was confirming something she'd suspected for much longer than tonight. "Because I should have done this a long time ago," she said. "And I kept not doing it. I kept thinking the next year would be different, or that I was being unfair, or that I wasn't trying hard enough. I've been telling myself so many stories, Nathan. I've used up an enormous amount of energy on those stories. Evelyn, she's wearing the robe." Her voice didn't crack. "The Milan robe. The one I never wore because I was waiting for the right occasion." She closed the suitcase. "I can't decide if that's the saddest part or not. I think maybe it is." He stepped into the room. "I made a mistake. I know that. I know what this looks like, and I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but please don't go tonight. Please let me—" "Nathan," she lifted the suitcase off the bed. "I'm not leaving you." She looked at him one final time, and her face held something that wasn't rage and wasn't grief and wasn't contempt. It was more like clarity, the expression of someone who has finally read the last page of a book and understood the whole thing all at once. "I'm finally going home." She walked past him, down the hallway, into the living room where the woman in the robe was no longer standing, apparently having had the sense to move somewhere out of sight. She left through the front door without looking back and took the elevator down to the lobby, where Pedro was now halfway through whatever he was reading and looked up briefly with a tired smile. "Have a good night, Mrs. Carter." "Thank you, Pedro," she said. "I think I'm going to." She walked out onto East 74th and called Claire Dawson from the sidewalk, standing there with her suitcase on the pavement, the city doing what the city always did, unconcerned, continuous, magnificently indifferent to any one person's private catastrophe. Claire picked up on the second ring. Evelyn? It's almost midnight. I know. I'm sorry. Are you home? A pause. Claire had known Evelyn for 23 years, since their second year at Hartwell Conservatory, when they'd been assigned neighboring practice rooms and had spent more time talking through the wall than actually playing. She could read something in 3 syllables. What happened? I'll tell you when I get there. Evelyn raised her arm for a cab. Can I stay with you for a while? Evelyn, obviously yes. Obviously. Another pause. Do you want me to stay on the phone? No, I'm fine. I just need to get there. I'm putting the kettle on. Evelyn got in the cab. She watched the city slide past the windows. 68 blocks up and 2 avenues over, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. The very first, faint, tentative breath of relief. Quotes. Nathan Hale was not a man who panicked. This was something people said about him, often admiringly, in the profiles that ran in financial magazines and the speeches that other people gave at dinners where he was being honored. Under pressure, Nathan Hale simply recalibrates. He'd read that sentence about himself once and hadn't disagreed. It was largely accurate. He had fired senior partners, absorbed hostile takeovers, sat across tables from men who wanted to destroy his company, and not once had he lost the thread. That night, he lost the thread completely. Lena Cross left at midnight. She dressed quickly, said almost nothing, and had the self-possession to look merely inconvenienced rather than chastened. At the door she turned and said, "You should call your lawyer." He didn't respond. She left. He sat in the living room for 2 hours. He poured the Bordeaux down the kitchen sink because he couldn't look at it. He called Evelyn's cell 3 times. She didn't pick up, and he didn't leave messages because he couldn't find the words to put in a message. And this itself was disorienting because Nathan Hale always had words. Words had been his primary instrument for 3 decades. Words in boardrooms, words in courtrooms, words in negotiations that had moved markets. But standing in his own living room at 1 a.m, alone, he found himself utterly without them. He called his brother James at 2:30. James picked up already awake, which meant James had been lying there in the way he sometimes did when something was wrong and hadn't called yet. She came home early, Nathan said. A long silence. How bad? Lena was here. Another silence, longer this time. Nathan. I know. I told you. I know, James. I know what you told me. James Hale was 4 years younger and had made a comfortable life for himself in a world well outside Nathan's orbit. He ran a small architecture firm, had been married to the same woman for 17 years, coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends. He had never wanted what Nathan had, and Nathan had spent years assuming this was a failure of ambition on James's part. He was starting to wonder if it was the opposite. Where is she? James asked. I don't know. Nathan paused. I think Claire's. Claire Dawson is her oldest friend. She'd go there. Do you have Claire's number? I'm not calling Claire at 2 a.m. No, you're right. You're not. A beat. Nathan, what do you actually want here? Not what you're planning to do. What do you want? Nathan stood at the window and looked out at the city that had given him everything he'd ever decided to want and tried to answer that question honestly. I want her back. Then whatever you've been doing for the last 9 years, James said quietly, you're going to have to stop doing it. Nathan didn't sleep. He sat in his study until the windows lightened with early morning, his phone on the desk, Evelyn's number on the screen. He thought about the way she'd looked at him before she left. Not with hatred, not with the hot fury he might have been able to argue with or navigate, or at least have something to push back against. She'd looked at him with clarity. That was the part he couldn't stop returning to. The calm in her eyes, the terrible, unassailable calm of someone who has finally stopped talking herself into something. He thought about 9 years. He thought about the dinner parties where she'd sat beside him and done everything a person could do beside him, and he had barely noticed. The morning she'd brought coffee to his study without being asked, and he'd been on the phone. The anniversary where he'd sent flowers, expensive flowers, to the apartment because he couldn't make the dinner and he had genuinely thought, that the flowers were sufficient. He thought about the Milan robe. He'd ordered it because a stylist had told him Evelyn's anniversary gift should be something personal. He had taken the word personal and assigned it to someone else to execute, and then had barely registered that the robe existed. He hadn't known she was saving it. He hadn't known she was waiting for a moment he never gave her. He picked up his phone and sent her a text message at 5:47 in the morning. I'm not going to ask you to come back tonight. I just need you to know I understand what I did. Not just last night, all of it. He stared at it for 60 seconds, then sent it. She did not reply. Claire Dawson's apartment on the Upper West Side was the kind of place that had accumulated rather than been designed. Mismatched furniture that somehow coexisted peacefully, bookshelves that had long since surrendered to double stacking, a kitchen with good light, and copper pots that actually got used. Claire taught English literature at a nearby university and had spent 18 years building a life she'd chosen rather than inherited, and the apartment reflected this in its bones. Evelyn showed up at 12 past midnight with her suitcase and her sheet music and her wooden box, and Claire took one look at her and did not ask a single question. She simply stepped aside and held the door open. They sat at the kitchen table with tea until almost 3 in the morning. Evelyn talked, not in the torrential, overwrought way of someone releasing a catastrophe, more in the slow, methodical way of someone sorting through boxes they hadn't opened in years, turning each thing over in their hands, deciding what to keep. The worst part, Evelyn said, at some point after 2, is that I wasn't even shocked. That's what I keep sitting with. I wasn't shocked. I was confirmed. Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. She was 61, sharp-faced, silver-streaked, and she had the discipline not to say I told you, or I always thought, or any of the things a person could say in that moment that would make the speaker feel vindicated and the listener feel worse. What does confirmed feel like? Exhausted, Evelyn said. It feels like exhausted. She slept in Claire's second bedroom on a mattress with a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender, and she slept, astonishingly, without difficulty, without the churning wakefulness she had expected. She woke at 7:15 to the sound of Claire making noise in the kitchen, with the particular cheerful lack of stealth of someone who has lived alone too long. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling and noticed that the feeling in her chest was still there, that fragile, unaccustomed something. It had gotten marginally less tentative overnight. She got up and went to the kitchen. I put your sheet music on the bookshelf, Claire said, sliding a mug toward her. The Chopin is sticking out. I didn't want to push it in case you had it organized some specific way. It's not organized. Then I'll push it in. Evelyn sat at the table. I haven't played in almost 4 years. I know. I don't know if I still can. You can. Claire said it without particular emphasis, like a simple fact of geography. The question is whether you want to. Evelyn looked at her tea. Through the window, the morning was doing something complicated with clouds and light, the city cycling through its ordinary motions, wholly uninterested in her private reckonings. She thought about the Hartwell Conservatory, the practice rooms, the years before Nathan when she had spent 4, 5, 6 hours a day at the keyboard and never once had to be convinced it was worth the time. She thought about the afternoon she'd given her first public recital and the way the air in the room had felt different during the performance, charged, like something real was happening. She thought about when she had stopped believing she was allowed to want that anymore. I want to, she said. Claire nodded. Good. She reached over and topped off Evelyn's tea. I'm going to teach at 9. You can have the apartment. I have an upright piano in the spare room that I've been using as a very expensive shelf for the last 6 years. Feel free to clear it off. Evelyn looked at her. You have a piano? I bought it during the pandemic with intentions I did not follow through on. Claire put the kettle back. Consider it karmic reassignment. After Claire left, Evelyn sat in the apartment for a long time. She looked at Nathan's text message, the one sent at 5:47 in the morning. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table and went to the spare room. The piano was a Baldwin upright, dark walnut finish, buried under 2 boxes of books, a folded yoga mat still in its original packaging, and 3 canvas bags from a reusable shopping initiative Claire had apparently gone through and then abandoned. Evelyn moved everything methodically to the floor. She lifted the key cover. The keys were dusty, but intact. She sat on the bench for a moment doing nothing. Then she placed her hands on the keys. Not to play anything, just to feel the cool of the ivory under her fingers, the particular weight of them under very slight pressure, the mechanical fidelity of it. Nothing in the world felt quite like this. No other surface, no other weight. She played a single C major scale. Slowly, her right hand only. The sound came out of the instrument and into the room, and she felt it in her sternum, below the exhaustion and the clearing out and the strange relief, something that had been very quiet for a very long time, stirring like a room being opened after years of being sealed. She started the Chopin nocturne she had been playing at 19. The E-flat major. She had performed it so many times she didn't need the music. Her fingers found the opening bars with an uncertainty that was physical more than mental, the muscles slightly out of practice, the intervals requiring more thought than they once had. She made mistakes. She stopped. She started again. By the third attempt, something had let go. She played for 2 hours without checking the time. When she finally stopped, her hands were trembling slightly. Not from weakness, but from the specific exhaustion of having asked more of a thing than it had given in years. She sat on the bench with her hands in her lap and the room quiet around her. Her phone had 12 notifications, 4 from Nathan, 3 from a number she didn't recognize, 2 from her sister in Philadelphia, 1 from her assistant at work asking about the conference, and 1 from Claire that just said, "How's the karmic reassignment going?" She answered Claire first. Better than expected. Then she looked at Nathan's messages. They were variations on a theme. "Please call me. I need to know you're all right. I'm sorry. Evelyn, please." And she read them in the same way she'd read his text in the early morning, carefully, without hurry, measuring each word against the full weight of what she knew. She felt something when she read them. She was honest enough not to pretend she felt nothing. 9 years, and whatever they had been, however badly the end had arrived, she had loved him for a long time with the full and complicated machinery of a real person's love. That didn't evaporate in a night, but love and return were not the same thing. She had learned that much in 2 hours at a piano. She put the phone down without answering. She went to the kitchen and made herself a proper breakfast for the first time in longer than she could accurately recall: eggs, toast, orange juice, sitting at Claire's table in the morning light, and ate all of it. Nathan called her 11 times over the next 4 days. She answered twice, briefly, to confirm that she was safe and that she had spoken to her attorney, a woman named Sandra Park, who had a reputation for being thorough in the particular way that made opposing counsel anxious. Both conversations were short and civil, and clarified nothing about what came next. Nathan was not accustomed to conversations that clarified nothing. He had spent his career engineering conversations toward specific destinations. Evelyn's willingness to simply hang up when a conversation had said what it needed to say was something he found disorienting in a way he couldn't properly name. He called James every day. James listened. He did not offer easy comfort, which was both infuriating and, Nathan dimly understood, the only form of real help being offered. "You need to give her time," James said on the 3rd day. I can't just do nothing." Doing nothing is doing something. It's doing the thing she's asking for. "She hasn't asked me for anything." "She left, Nathan. That's a request." On the 4th day, the investigator Nathan had quietly retained sent a preliminary report. Lena Cross was 28, had a background in corporate communications, and had started at a consulting firm called Voss Strategic Group 8 months before she and Nathan had met at an industry event. Nathan read that name, Voss Strategic Group, and felt a familiar, unpleasant recognition stir at the back of his mind. Marcus Voss. He'd been a nuisance on the shareholder side of things for almost 2 years, persistent, patient, calculating, accumulating small positions, asking inconvenient questions in filings, the kind of long-game pressure that serious operators used when they couldn't make a direct move. He flagged it for his general counsel and tried not to extrapolate. He didn't have enough yet. What he had instead was a marriage that was somewhere between badly damaged and destroyed, a wife who had walked out of his apartment with the composure of someone who had already been leaving slowly for years and had simply chosen tonight as the night to make it official, and a city that continued to move around him in its perpetual unimpressed motion as if none of this was its concern. He sat at his desk on the fifth morning after she'd gone, his office on the 42nd floor looking out over a city he had spent a lifetime acquiring leverage over, and he thought about 9 years. He was not a man prone to self-examination. It had never been a professional asset, and he had long since conflated his professional habits with his personal ones. But sitting there in the early morning quiet before his team arrived, he tried to do what he rarely did: trace things backward honestly. He had married Evelyn Carter because she was the most genuinely interesting person he had ever spent 3 consecutive hours talking with. That had been his private, unspoken reason, underneath all the appropriate reasons about compatibility and values and mutual respect. She had been playing at a small venue in the West Village. A friend of a friend had dragged him there, and he had been planning to leave after 30 minutes. And she had sat at the piano and produced something that made the room go completely, voluntarily still. Afterward, he had introduced himself at the bar, and they had talked until the bar closed, and he had walked back to his apartment thinking about her for 6 blocks before deciding he was going to find a way to see her again. He had spent 9 years in the company of the most interesting person he had ever met and had steadily, systematically failed to pay attention. He had been too busy, too distracted, too convinced that his presence in the apartment was enough, that sharing a bed and a last name and the occasional dinner constituted a marriage. He had taken the most quietly extraordinary person in his life and treated her like a feature of his household, and she had stood in the bedroom packing her suitcase with the composure of someone who had already grieved everything she was leaving, and she had told him she was finally going home, and he had understood in that moment, too late, 4 seconds too late, 4 years too late, exactly what he had done. His assistant knocked at 8. He straightened at his desk. Put the thought somewhere to be dealt with later. There was a company to run. He ran it. But in the back of everything, like a tab left open that he couldn't close, was Evelyn Carter. 68 blocks uptown, in Claire Dawson's spare room, apparently playing piano again. He knew this because James had heard it from someone who knew Claire, and had mentioned it carefully. The way a person mentions something they know matters more than their letting on. She was playing piano again. Nathan turned back to his work. But the open tab stayed open. It would stay open. He was beginning to understand it was going to stay open for a very long time. The piano had been Claire's idea in the same way that breathing was Claire's idea. It wasn't really, but she had created the conditions for it, which amounted to the same thing. By the end of the first week, Evelyn had established something that almost resembled a routine. She woke early, made coffee before Claire stirred, and spent the first hour of the morning at the Baldwin upright in the spare room. Not practicing in the disciplined, methodical sense she had once known, more like reacquainting herself with something she had convinced herself she no longer needed. She played slowly, made mistakes she didn't rush past, and allowed the mistakes to stay in the room for a moment before correcting them. In 9 years of marriage to a man who moved at the velocity of quarterly earnings, she had forgotten that mistakes were allowed to exist before being fixed. Claire left for campus most mornings at 8:45, usually with a travel mug in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, and usually pausing in the doorway of the spare room to listen for 30 seconds before leaving without comment. It was exactly the right amount of attention. Evelyn had always known that Claire Dawson was a good friend, but she was rediscovering the specific texture of it, the way Claire asked exactly one meaningful question per day, and let the rest of the conversation happen at whatever pace Evelyn set. On the 9th day, the question was, "Have you thought about what you're going to do with your mornings long term?" Evelyn looked up from the piano. "You're not kicking me out." "Obviously not. I'm asking what you want." Claire leaned against the doorframe. "You gave up a lot when you married him. The teaching, the performance work. What do you actually want to do now?" Evelyn considered it honestly. Before Nathan, she had taught piano at the Meridian Arts Center on West 83rd, a community arts organization that ran youth programs and adult classes and a modest performance series. She had loved it with a completeness that had embarrassed her slightly at the time, the way loving anything very simply can feel unsophisticated in certain company. Nathan's company specifically, where people's passions were large and loud and denominated in market share. She had let the teaching go gradually, first reducing her hours, then taking a leave when Nathan's schedule made 2 full-time lives logistically impossible. And then the leave had quietly become permanent, and she had told herself she didn't miss it as much as she'd expected to. She had been lying. "I want to teach again," she said, "and I want to actually play, not perform, just play, for now. Get my hands back." Claire nodded. "Call Meridian. Marcus Webb is still the director. I see him occasionally at department events. I haven't been in contact with them in 4 years." Marcus Webb, Claire said, is the kind of person who has never in his life held a 4-year gap against anyone who is genuinely good at something. She picked up her travel mug. "Call him." Evelyn called him that afternoon. Marcus picked up on the 3rd ring and said her name with the warmth of someone for whom 4 years was a minor administrative detail rather than a personal abandonment, and by the end of a 20-minute conversation, she had agreed to come in on Thursday to discuss a part-time position covering 2 morning classes and sitting in on the youth ensemble rehearsals. She hung up and sat in the kitchen for a moment, and the feeling in her chest, the one she had first noticed on the sidewalk outside her building on East 74th, got measurably less fragile. She did not tell Nathan. But Nathan found out where she was on day 6. Not through any aggressive means. Claire Dawson's address was not difficult information for a man with Nathan's resources. But he did not go there, and he did not send anything to that address, because James had been clear and Sandra Park had been clearer. Any contact that felt like pressure would damage whatever slim chance remained. He knew this logically. He sat with the knowledge that he was 68 blocks from his wife and could not close that distance by force of will or money or either of the considerable advantages he had spent his career building, and he found this so genuinely disorienting that he spent most of his evenings doing something he almost never did, which was simply sitting still. His general counsel, a careful man named Philip Strauss, came to him on day 8 with what he described as a preliminary concern. "The Voss filing," Philip said, setting a folder on Nathan's desk. "He's filed another request for an independent audit of Q3 projections. 3rd time in 6 months. He's been doing this for 2 years. What's different? What's different is that whoever is briefing him is getting better information." Philip sat down. The Q3 language in his filing uses internal terminology, specific terminology, things that aren't in any public document. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Someone's talking to him. Someone's been talking to him for a while. But the language in this filing is from a strategy memo that went to 8 people. I've cross-referenced it. 7 of those 8 people have been with this company for a decade or more. They're not his people. Philip paused. The 8th name isn't someone I'd have flagged on my own. "Who?" Philip told him. Nathan looked at the folder without opening it for a long moment. The name Philip had said was not a stranger. It was a name connected to a specific context, a consulting introduction at an industry event approximately 10 months ago. Before Evelyn had come home early, before the robe, before any of it had become the thing it had become. He opened the folder. He read it carefully, which was how Nathan Hale read everything when it mattered. He did not rush, did not skim, did not make the mistake of deciding what the information meant before he'd absorbed all of it. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked out the window for approximately 60 seconds. "Pull the NDA she signed through the consulting engagement," he said. "Get me the full engagement history, every deliverable, every access level, every system she touched. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning." He paused. "And Philip, keep this very small. 4 people maximum." Philip picked up the folder. "I understand." At the door, he stopped. "Nathan, if this is what it looks like, she's been in this apartment. She's had access to a considerable amount." "I know. It's not just a personal matter at that point." "I know what it is." Nathan's voice stayed even. "Tomorrow morning." Philip left. Nathan sat at his desk and turned the thing over in his mind the way he turned everything over, methodically, without the luxury of the emotional response that was simultaneously trying to claim space. Because what this was beginning to look like was not simply an affair. What this was beginning to look like was that Lana Cross had not wandered into his life at an industry party. She had been placed there. And if she had been placed there, then Evelyn who had worked sometimes from the apartment, who had occasionally used his home network, who had been present for dinner parties where work came up, who had known more about the interior of his professional life than anyone outside the company, Evelyn had been an unknowing point of entry, not a participant, a target. He picked up his phone. He did not call Evelyn. He sat with this new information and understood that calling her with it now would look like maneuvering, like a man who had been caught using his own emotional catastrophe as a corporate intelligence shield. He understood it would look that way because it might actually be that way, and he was honest enough with himself, alone in his office at 8 in the evening, to sit with the discomfort of that. He called James instead. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to tell me honestly if what I'm about to do is wrong." James listened. There was a long pause when Nathan finished. "If what you're describing is accurate," James said, "then she needs to know. Not for your sake, for hers. Because she was used, Nathan, without knowing it. She deserves to know that. And if telling her looks like I'm using it, then you tell her anyway, and you live with how it looks. You don't get to protect your image here." Another pause. "You lost the right to manage your image with Evelyn the night she walked out." Nathan put the phone down. He sat in his empty apartment on East 74th and looked at the living room where 2 wine glasses had been left on the coffee table and thought about a woman 68 blocks away playing piano on a borrowed Baldwin upright, quietly rebuilding a life he had given her every reason to rebuild without him. Meridian Art Center was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been a warehouse in a previous decade and had been converted with more enthusiasm than budget. Exposed ducts, good natural light from high windows, and a general atmosphere of productive chaos that Evelyn had always found more comfortable than the sterile precision of the concert halls Nathan preferred. Marcus Webb met her at the front desk on Thursday morning and shook her hand with the two-handed warmth of a man who was genuinely glad to see someone and had no complicated agenda about it. He was 58, slight, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular energy of a person who had been running an arts organization on chronically insufficient funding for so long that enthusiasm had become structural rather than optional. "Evelyn Carter," he said, holding her hand in both of his, "it is genuinely good to have you here. Come and see what we've done to the place." What they had done in 4 years was expand modestly and improve considerably. 2 new practice rooms, an upgraded recording booth that Marcus was openly proud of and slightly defensive about the cost of, a youth ensemble that had grown from 8 students to 22 and had performed in 3 city-sponsored events. "They're extraordinary, some of them," Marcus said, leading her past a rehearsal room where a girl of about 15 was working through a Debussy prelude with an intensity that made Evelyn pause briefly in the doorway. "Absolutely no idea how good they are, which is either the best or worst thing about being young." He offered her 2 sections of adult beginner piano on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and a Friday afternoon session with the youth ensemble, not as primary instructor, but as a second pair of hands and ears. The pay was what it had always been at Meridian, which was to say honest rather than generous, and she took it without negotiation because she wasn't there for the money. "There's one other thing," Marcus said, as they finished the tour at his office door. "We have a small performance series that's 6 concerts a year, local artists, mixed repertoire. The December slot just opened up. No pressure. But if at some point you were interested, ask me in November," Evelyn said. Marcus smiled. "Fair enough." She started the following Tuesday. The adult beginners were a group of 8, ranging in age from 34 to 67, and they were uniformly, endearingly terrible in the way of people who had decided at some point in their lives that they were going to try something that frightened them, and were now in the process of discovering that the frightening thing was also humbling. A retired postal worker named Gerald, who held his hands like he was about to arm wrestle the keyboard. A woman named Patricia who had perfect rhythm and no relationship whatsoever with the concept of finger independence. A young man who had introduced himself as simply Dev, and who had clearly watched too many YouTube tutorials and approached the instrument with the confidence of someone who had not yet encountered the gap between watching and doing. Evelyn found, within the first 20 minutes of that first Tuesday session, that she was good at this. Not competent, good. She moved around the room with an ease she hadn't expected, finding the right words for each person's specific problem, hearing where the difficulty lived and naming it without making the person feel named. She had always been good at this. She had simply forgotten. By the end of the session, Gerald had played a clean G major scale with both hands. He looked at his own hands afterward with an expression of such uncomplicated delight that Evelyn had to turn away for a moment to compose herself, which was not something she had anticipated needing to do. Walking home to Claire's afterward, it was a good day, mild for early October, the kind of morning that made Manhattan seem like it had been arranged by someone with aesthetic intentions. She noticed that she was walking differently, more squarely, taking up slightly more sidewalk. She called her sister Louise that afternoon. Louise, who lived in Philadelphia with her husband and 2 teenage sons, and who had very carefully not said anything negative about Nathan for 9 years, because she was the kind of person who understood that unsolicited opinions about a sibling's marriage were a good way to lose access to the sibling. "I started teaching again," Evelyn said. A pause that contained, Louise said later, about 47 things she chose not to say. "How does it feel?" "Like remembering my own name?" She paused. I know how that sounds. "It sounds accurate," Louise said carefully. "Evelyn, are you okay? Actually okay?" "I think I'm going to be. That's not the same as okay right now, but it feels like it points in the right direction." She was quiet for a moment. "I was disappearing in that marriage, Lou. I didn't even notice it happening. That's the part that gets me. I didn't notice." "You were busy not noticing," Louise said. He was very good at being impressive enough that not noticing seemed like the reasonable response. "That's a generous reading. It's the accurate one, and eventually you did notice." A pause. "What is he doing?" "Calling. I've answered twice. We've talked to our attorneys." She looked out Claire's window at the street below. "He sounds different, quieter. Is that meaningful?" Evelyn thought about the text he'd sent at 5:47 in the morning on the night she'd left. The specific language of it, not just last night, all of it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm not trying to figure it out right now." What she was trying to do, instead, was be somewhere she hadn't been in a long time, inside her own life, with her hands on the wheel of it. It was harder than it should have been. She had spent so long organizing herself around Nathan's schedule, Nathan's preferences, Nathan's social obligations and professional needs, and the particular rhythms of being married to a man who moved at the speed of capital, that she had to consciously relearn the muscle memory of deciding things purely for herself, what she wanted to eat and when, where she wanted to walk on a Sunday, what she wanted to do with a Saturday afternoon that had no one in it but her. The answers surprised her sometimes. She wanted to walk. She wanted to cook things she used to cook before the private chef arrangements Nathan had decided were more practical. She wanted to sit in a coffee shop for 2 hours with nothing to do and not feel guilty about the nothing. She was 3 weeks in when the video happened. It was a Friday afternoon, the youth ensemble session, and they had been working on a piece that Marcus had arranged for the group, a simplified version of a satie gymnopodie that the ensemble had been fighting with for 2 weeks. The rhythm was there, mostly. The feel was not. Evelyn had been circling it for 40 minutes, making suggestions, adjusting, and the students, earnest, focused, frustrated in the way of young people who could hear the gap between what they were producing and what they wanted to produce, were starting to lose the thread. She sat down at the studio's upright. "Can I show you something?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. The room went still. She played it through once, not simplified. The full satie, at tempo, with the specific quality it required. Patient, slightly suspended, a piece of music that seemed to exist slightly outside of ordinary time. She played it the way she had played as a 20-year-old who believed completely in the importance of every note, and she did not think about her hands or her technique or whether she was being watched. She simply played. When she stopped, the room was quiet for a moment, in a way that rooms sometimes are when something real has happened in them. A boy of 16 named Theo, who had been coming to Meridian for 3 years and who communicated primarily through the guitar he carried everywhere and a few dozen words per week, said, "Can you play that again?" She did. And this time she talked through it while she played. Not giving a lesson, just speaking the way you speak when you're trying to give someone access to a thing you're inside of. The weight is here, in the left hand. Don't think about the tempo. Think about what the space between the notes sounds like. Marcus was in the doorway. She didn't notice him. She didn't notice the girl in the back of the room, a 16-year-old named Yara, who was there for the violin section, but had her phone out because she'd been filming a time-lapse of the afternoon sun through the high windows and had simply forgotten to stop. The video was 47 seconds. Evelyn at the piano, the room's afternoon light doing something remarkable across the keys, the students in the background with the particular posture of people who have stopped fidgeting. Yara posted it without significant intent, tagged Meridian Arts Center, and went home. By the following Monday, it had 300,000 views. By Wednesday, it had passed 1 million. Evelyn found out from Marcus, who called her Sunday evening sounding precisely as stunned as the numbers warranted. "I've been getting press inquiries," he said. 3 this morning. "Evelyn, someone from the Alderton Music Festival called. They want to know if you have representation." She sat at Claire's kitchen table with the phone held slightly away from her face. I know. I wasn't performing. I was teaching." "I know that too. That's what they're calling about. That's what people are responding to." He paused. Someone described it in a comment as watching someone remember how to be themselves in real time. She sat with that for a moment. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked. She looked around Claire's kitchen. The copper pots, the good light, the accumulated life of a woman who had spent 18 years building something that was entirely hers. She thought about Gerald and his G major scale. She thought about Theo asking to hear the Satie again. She thought about the feeling in her sternum when she'd played that afternoon, the thing that had been very quiet for years. "I don't know yet," she said. "Let me think about it." She thought about it for approximately 45 minutes, which was longer than she expected to need. Then she opened her laptop and began to research what a musician returning to the professional sphere after an extended absence typically needed to do first. She did not call Nathan. She did not need Nathan for this. That was the thing she kept arriving at, the thing she turned over and found the same each time. She did not need Nathan. She had resources of her own, a career of her own before the marriage, skills and relationships that had simply been dormant rather than destroyed. She was not starting from nothing. She was starting from something she had always had and simply stopped tending. She stayed up until midnight reading. Claire came home at 10:30, poured herself a glass of wine, looked at Evelyn's open laptop and her expression of focused concentration, and went to bed without saying anything because she understood that some things required exactly this: a person and a table and a late night and the quiet company of their own capable mind. Nathan saw the video on Tuesday. His assistant forwarded it with a one-line note. "Thought you should see this." He watched it once and sat very still. Then he watched it again. 47 seconds. Evelyn at a piano he didn't recognize, in a room full of teenagers who were watching her the way the audience at that West Village venue had watched her 23 years ago, the same quality of attention, the kind a room gives when it has been given no choice. He watched it a third time without meaning to. Then he put his phone face down on the desk and looked at the wall for a long moment. 1 million views. A woman who had spent 9 years in the background of his life had sat down at a borrowed piano in an arts center he'd never heard of and produced 47 seconds of something that 1 million strangers found worth stopping for. He thought about the Milan robe. He thought about the dinner parties. He thought about the countless evenings he had come home distracted and gone directly to his study without asking how her day had been, not because he didn't care, but because he had been operating under the assumption, unchallenged, unexamined, that her days were smaller than his and therefore less urgent. He thought about how long he had been wrong about this. Philip knocked and came in without waiting, which meant it was the corporate matter. He set a second folder on the desk. "Confirmation," he said simply. Nathan didn't open it yet. "All of it?" "Enough of it. The consulting arrangement was a setup. Voss is her primary contact. The billing structure is buried, but it's there. She had access to your home network for 8 months through a shared device you authorized during the relationship. 3 separate strategy documents were accessed from that network. Our forensic team found the transfer timestamps." Nathan was quiet. "Nathan," Philip sat down. This is securities fraud territory at minimum, possibly corporate espionage under the federal statute. This isn't something we can handle quietly. I know. The attorneys need to be in the room, today, ideally. Set it up. Nathan finally picked up the second folder and opened it. He read the first page. Then he set it down and looked at his general counsel. Philip, Evelyn didn't know. No. Everything in the forensics is consistent with passive access. She wasn't the one pulling documents. The device she used was compromised. She was there. She was just there, Nathan repeated. He said it the way you say something when you're processing it and the processing has not yet finished. She was in my house, using my network, and someone used her as a conduit without her knowing, and I brought that person into my house. Philip was quiet because there was nothing to add. Set up the attorney meeting, Nathan said, and get me James on the phone. He called Evelyn that evening. She picked up on the fourth ring, which was more than he'd expected. I need to tell you something, he said. Not about us. About something you need to know for yourself. Is there any possibility we could meet? Somewhere neutral, just to talk. A pause on her end. He could hear something in the background. Faint, familiar. She was near the piano. What is it, Nathan? I'd rather tell you in person. It's important, Evelyn. I'm not trying to maneuver anything. This isn't about asking you for anything. Another pause. Longer. He stayed in it. Okay, she said. Coffee. Somewhere public. And Nathan, you do not get to make this about us. If you agreed to meet and then make it about us, I'm going to leave. I understand. Thursday. There's a place called Hartley's on Amsterdam in 86, 10 o'clock. I'll be there. She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and understood that he had 48 hours to figure out how to tell the woman he had failed completely that she had also been failed by someone he had brought close enough to fail her. He sat with how that felt. He did not look away from it. Outside his window, the city moved on in its practiced indifference, 31 floors of distance between him and the street, and somewhere 68 blocks north, a woman he had overlooked for 9 years was quietly, without his help, in the process of becoming someone the world was beginning to notice. Hartley's on Amsterdam was the kind of coffee shop that had been there long enough to stop trying. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed significantly since the previous administration. The smell of something baked that morning competing pleasantly with dark roast. Evelyn arrived 4 minutes early, which was deliberate. She wanted to be seated before Nathan arrived, wanted the small psychological advantage of being the person already there rather than the person walking in to find the other one waiting. She ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table and told herself she was not nervous. She was partially lying. Not nervous in the way she might have been a month ago, when she was still in the marriage and still operating under the ambient hope that things might somehow correct themselves. That kind of nervousness had a pleading quality to it, a need. What she felt now was more like alertness, the careful attention of someone who has decided not to be managed. Nathan arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, which was also deliberate. He was wearing a gray coat she recognized. She had picked it out, actually, at a store on Madison 3 years ago when he'd said he needed something less formal for weekend meetings, an oxymoron she had let pass without comment. He looked like he had slept adequately, but not well. He spotted her immediately, crossed the room, and sat down without touching her, without the instinctive social kiss on the cheek that had been their greeting for years. He seemed to understand that the coordinates of what they were to each other had shifted, and that old gestures in new terrain were landmines. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said it was important." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "So." He had ordered nothing yet. He seemed to register this, half turned toward the counter, then decided against it. "I need to tell you something about Lena Cross." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. "All right. What happened between us wasn't only what it looked like." He said it carefully, in the manner of a man who has rehearsed the order of information and is following that order with discipline. "She came into my life through an industry event. I've told myself it was coincidence. It wasn't. Our forensic team spent the last 2 weeks going through her engagement history, her billing records, her network access. She was placed there, Evelyn, by Marcus Voss. Evelyn was quiet. She looked at him. Marcus Voss? The shareholder. He's been trying to compromise the company for 2 years, slow, patient, the kind of pressure that's hard to call out because each piece of it looks almost legitimate on its own. Lena was working for him, has been since before I met her. The consulting arrangement was cover. Her access to the company's strategy documents came through. He stopped. Started again. She was in our apartment for 8 months. She used a device on our home network. My team found timestamps on 3 internal strategy documents that were accessed from that address. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. Evelyn processed it the way she processed things, not by reacting immediately, but by turning it over and examining each surface. She knew, even in the first 5 seconds, what the sequence meant. She had been in that apartment. She had used that network. She had been present at dinners where work came up naturally, where people talked across tables about things that seemed like ordinary conversation and were, apparently, something else entirely to at least one person in the room. She used me, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. She used our home. You were incidental to it. You didn't do anything, Evelyn. Our forensics team is certain. The access pattern is consistent with passive compromise, not active participation. You were just there. She said the word the same way he had said it in his office to Philip, though she didn't know that. I was just there. Yes. She set down her coffee cup. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. Does this change anything about what you did? Nathan met her eyes. No. Good. Because I want to be clear that I understand you're telling me this because I need to know it, not because it explains you or excuses you or makes the larger situation less than what it is. I know that. And you understand that I was already inside a marriage that I had already been. She paused, and there was something in the pause that wasn't grief and wasn't anger, but was in the territory of both, something precise and real. I was already disappearing in that apartment long before she was ever in it. That's the part you have to understand. She was a specific betrayal. The other thing was 9 years. I know. He said it without qualification, without the instinct to explain or justify that she had spent 9 years watching him apply to everything. He just said it and let it be what it was. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, Amsterdam Avenue was doing its morning business. A woman with a stroller, 2 men arguing cheerfully outside a bodega, a delivery truck attempting a turn it was not entirely going to achieve. What happens to her? Evelyn asked. Legally. Our attorneys filed yesterday. Securities fraud, corporate espionage under the federal statute, breach of multiple confidentiality provisions. Voss is named as primary. Lena as a co-conspirator. He paused. It's going to be public. I wanted you to know before it was public. When? The filings become public record Monday. Press will have it by Monday afternoon at the latest. Evelyn nodded slowly. She thought about the fact that her name was going to be adjacent to this, not as a participant, but as a location, a context. The estranged wife, the unwitting conduit. She thought about how a story like this gets told by people who are not inside it, and what gets simplified and what gets lost. Is my name in the filing? No, my attorneys were specific about that. The network address is referenced technically. You're not identified. All right. She picked up her coffee again. Thank you for telling me. Nathan looked at her. He seemed to want to say something else. She could see it. The thing he was holding back, the question or the ask or the particular piece of himself he had always found it difficult to offer without an agenda attached. She watched him decide not to say it. How are you? He asked instead, which was not what he had been about to say, but it was the right thing. Better than I expected to be, she said honestly. I'm teaching at Meridian again. You may have seen the video. Yes. Something moved across his face. You were extraordinary. I was teaching. Both things can be true. She almost said something and then didn't. There was a version of this conversation. She could feel its outline, where they started talking about what might still exist between them, where the warmth of being known by another person after weeks of separation pulled the conversation in a direction neither of them was ready for. She felt the pull. She was honest enough to feel it, and she was clear enough now at this particular corner table at Hartley's with her coffee going cold to know that feeling a pull and following it were two entirely different things. "I need to go," she said. "I have a class at 11. He nodded. He didn't ask to see her again. "Thank you for meeting me." She stood, put on her coat. "Nathan." He looked up. "I hope the legal thing goes the way it needs to go. For the company. I mean that." "I know you do." She left. She walked the 6 blocks to Meridian in the October morning, her hands in her pockets, and she let herself feel the full, complicated weight of what he'd told her. Not the legal dimensions, but the personal one. She had been used, not by someone who had targeted her specifically or maliciously. She had simply been terrain, convenient geography in someone else's war. And the specific cruelty of that was not that it was dramatic, but that it was so mundane. She had been overlooked in her marriage, and she had been overlooked in the conspiracy. In both cases, she had been in the room and gone unseen. She walked faster. But the legal machinery, once set in motion, moved with a velocity that Nathan's attorneys had prepared him for, and that was still, in practice, somewhat breathtaking. The civil filing became public on Monday. By Tuesday morning, 3 major financial outlets had the story. By Tuesday afternoon, the language being used in press coverage was the language Philip had warned about: corporate espionage, billionaire CEO, year-long infiltration. And by Tuesday evening, Nathan's communications team had issued a statement that was accurate and carefully limited and satisfied no one. Marcus Voss's attorneys issued a counterstatement that was aggressive and specific, and attempted to reframe the narrative in ways that Nathan's legal team immediately identified as preparation for a particular defense. Lena Cross said nothing publicly, which Nathan's lead attorney, a woman named Carolyn Reed, who had been doing this for 30 years and had seen most of the available configurations of human dishonesty, said was consistent with someone who had been told to say nothing by counsel, who understood that silence was currently their best asset. James came to the office on Wednesday. He sat across from Nathan at the desk in the way he had always sat across from Nathan. The specific posture of a younger brother who had spent a lifetime being honest with someone who didn't always want it. "How are you holding up?" James asked. "I'm fine. The company's fine. Philip thinks we have a strong case." "I didn't ask about the case." Nathan leaned back in his chair. He looked at his brother, who was 4 years younger and had coached his daughter's soccer team Saturday morning, in spite of all of this, because it was on the schedule and some things you show up for regardless. "I had coffee with Evelyn Thursday." James was quiet for a moment. "How did it go?" She was very clear." Nathan looked out the window. "She's teaching again. She looked like herself." It was the first time in a long time that I thought she looked like herself." "What did she say?" "She said what happened with Lena doesn't change what happened between us, that the marriage was... She said she was disappearing in it." He paused. Her word, disappearing. James was quiet. "I knew that," Nathan said, "not consciously. But I knew it the way you know something you haven't decided to know yet. I was aware that she had given things up. I told myself the life we had was a reasonable trade for the things she'd set aside. I told myself she was content." He stopped. "I never actually asked." "No," James said. "You didn't. I was too busy being content on her behalf." James looked at him for a long moment. "What do you want, Nathan? And I mean actually, not the answer that sounds right." Nathan was quiet for longer than was comfortable. "I want her to not have been unhappy. I want to be able to go back and be the person who noticed. I want..." He stopped again. He was not a man who found these kinds of sentences natural, and the effort of it showed on his face. "I want a second chance that I haven't earned and don't currently deserve." "Those are 3 different things," James said. "I know. The first one you can't have. The second one you can't have either." James leaned forward slightly. "The third one is possibly available, but not from where you're currently standing." "What does that mean?" "It means you can't buy your way back in, and you can't maneuver your way back in, and you can't even apologize your way back in." "Because she's been apologized to, Nathan. She's been managed and arranged and accommodated for 9 years. An apology from you is going to feel like more of the same unless it comes attached to something genuinely different. He paused. And you can't do different in a meeting. You have to do different across time. It's boring and slow, and there are no shortcuts, and you are not a person who is good at boring and slow and no shortcuts. Nathan looked at his brother for a moment. When did you get wise? I've always been wise. You've always been busy. Evelyn saw the press coverage on Tuesday morning with her coffee at Claire's kitchen table. She read 2 of the articles and closed the laptop. She sat with what she'd known for 5 days now, what Nathan had told her at Hartley's, and watched it become public and considered what it changed. The answer she kept arriving at was, less than you'd think. Claire came through the kitchen in her coat, grabbed her travel mug. She glanced at the closed laptop. You saw. This morning. You okay? Evelyn thought about it honestly. I'm angry, she said. Which is interesting because I wasn't angry after the robe. I was calm after the robe. This, being used without knowing it, being just there, just terrain, that makes me angry. That's an entirely appropriate response. I know, I'm not troubled by the anger, I'm just noting it. She looked at the closed laptop. I'm not going to let it take over the week. I have Gerald's scale to address, and Theo is trying something new with the Debussy, and I have 14 emails about the video that I still haven't responded to. Claire paused at the door. You know what the difference is between you now and you 6 months ago? What? 6 months ago you would have said, I'm fine, and meant it as a request to move on. Claire picked up her bag. You just told me exactly what you feel and what you're going to do about it without asking for either permission or a response. She opened the door. That's not nothing, Evelyn. She left. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and started answering the emails about the video. There were, at that point, 22 of them. 3 from journalists who wanted to write about her for outlets she recognized. 1 from a music director at a regional orchestra who had watched the video 4 times and wanted to discuss a possible guest performance. 1 from a recording studio called Larkspur Audio that had a modest but respected catalog and was interested in a conversation about a potential project. Several from strangers who had written the kind of message that people write when a 47-second video has done something to them they can't fully explain. I watched this and cried, and I'm not sure why. Thank you. She answered the strangers first. She thanked them individually and briefly because each message represented a person who had been moved by something she had done without intending to be watched, and that deserved acknowledgement. Then she answered the professional inquiries, careful, non-committal, genuinely interested, and scheduled 3 calls for the following week. She called Marcus afterward. Did you know about the recording studio email? Larkspur? Yes. They've placed work with some impressive people. Marcus paused. I want to say something, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended. Go ahead. You should think about the December slot. Evelyn looked out the window. The October light was doing something specific to the buildings across the street. The particular gold of mid-morning, the kind that made things look briefly more significant than they were, and also sometimes exactly as significant as they actually were. Marcus, I haven't performed publicly in 4 years. I know. A Meridian concert series performance after 4 years, while I'm in the middle of a very public. I'm in the middle of things that the press is already interested in. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, I watched you play for those kids on Friday. You were not playing for them. You were playing. They happened to be there. That's not a teaching demonstration. That's performance. You're already doing it. The question is just whether you give it a room. She didn't answer right away. Think about it, Marcus said. November. Mkiita. The lawsuit moved. In the weeks following the public filing, 3 things happened in relatively quick succession that changed the shape of the case considerably. First, a former employee of Voss Strategic Group contacted Carolyn Reed's office with documentation, internal communications between Voss and Lena Cross that predated the industry event where Nathan had met Lena by 4 months. The communications were specific about the assignment: build proximity, establish a personal relationship, maintain access. The word used internally for Lena's role was with a certain corporate banality, relationship asset. Second, a separate forensic review of Lena's own devices uncovered a complete document trail. Not just the 3 files Nathan's team had identified, but 11, spanning 8 months, covering pricing strategy, board communications, and a confidential assessment of the company's weakest regulatory position. Third, Marcus Voss made the mistake, under apparent legal pressure, of attempting to transfer a significant asset to a holding company registered in a different jurisdiction, which his attorneys should have advised him against, and which Carolyn Reed described to Nathan as an early Christmas gift. Carolyn gave Nathan the update in a meeting the 3rd week of October. She was a compact, precise woman who wore the same kind of expression whether she was delivering good news or bad, not because she was without feeling, but because she had learned that displays of feeling in this context were information she'd rather not give away. Voss is going to settle, she said. He doesn't have the document situation under control and he knows it. His counsel has been making noises through indirect channels. What kind of settlement? Significant. And a consent order with regulatory oversight going forward, which is arguably more valuable than the money. She paused. Lena Cross is cooperating. Nathan was quiet. She has provided a full account of the arrangement with Voss, including the timeline, the assignment parameters, and the access methodology. In exchange for cooperation, her exposure is substantially reduced. Carolyn said it in the flat, professional register of someone delivering information rather than editorial. I want to be transparent with you. Her account is corroborated by the documentation we have independently. It's credible. And the part about how she came to be in my life. Confirmed. The event introduction was arranged. There was a third party involved in the initial contact, someone in your industry circle who made the introduction in good faith without knowing the arrangement. She looked at him steadily. Nathan, she was a professional. This was a professional operation. These things happen to careful people. I wasn't careful. No, Carolyn agreed without cruelty. Not about this particular thing. James heard the update that evening by phone. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. So she was placed, James said. The entire thing was constructed. From the introduction forward. Does that... James stopped. I was going to ask if that changes how you feel about it, but I think I already know. It makes it more complicated, Nathan said. It doesn't make it less. I was still unfaithful to my wife. The reasons she was in my life don't change what I chose to do once she was there. He paused. I've been trying very hard not to use this as a reason. It isn't a reason. It's a context. There's a difference, James said. I know there's a difference. I'm just not sure Evelyn will see one. Have you told her the new information? Not yet. The settlement isn't final. When it is, she'll need to know. Not for us. Just because she's part of the factual record, even though she's not identified. She deserves to understand the full scope of what happened in her home. James was quiet for a moment. Are you going to fight for her? Nathan looked out the window of his study. East 74th in the evening, the street quiet by the city's standards, the kind of quiet that was really just a lower level of noise. I'm going to try to become someone worth fighting for first, he said, and then I'm going to let her decide. That's different than your usual approach. My usual approach has a very clear recent outcome. So, Evelyn told Claire about the Hartleys' meeting on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after it had happened, because she'd been carrying it in a particular way. Not heavily, but present, and she needed to say it out loud to someone who would give it the correct weight. They were cooking dinner together, which they had started doing on Thursday evenings as a kind of structure, and Evelyn was chopping onions, and Claire was doing something complicated with garlic and olive oil and making it look simple. He told me she was a setup, Evelyn said, that she was placed there by a shareholder who's been trying to undermine the company. Claire kept her eyes on the pan. I saw the press coverage. He told me before it was public. Evelyn swept the onions into a bowl. He wanted me to know first. That was the right thing to do. Yes. She picked up a second onion. He also didn't use it as an excuse. He was very clear that the Lena situation doesn't explain the marriage. He said that. She paused. That's not nothing. Nathan explaining himself without making himself the victim of his own explanation is not something I've seen very often. Claire turned down the heat on the pan and gave Evelyn a look that contained several years of friendship and the particular restraint of someone who has been waiting for permission to be honest. What does your gut tell you? About him. Not about the marriage or the situation. About him. Evelyn thought about it. Really thought about it. That he's genuinely scared, she said. That might be the first time I've seen that. I've seen him concerned about business things, about managing outcomes, but scared. Scared of losing something that has nothing to do with his net worth. I've never really seen that before. Is that enough? No, Evelyn said. Of course not. Fear isn't a plan. She started on the second onion. But it's real. And for a man who has spent his entire life being impressively unafraid of most things, being afraid of losing me, she stopped. It would have meant something 9 years ago if he'd managed to feel it then. And now? Now I have a class tomorrow morning and 3 professional calls next week and a decision to make about December. She looked at Claire. Now I have an actual life to figure out. And whatever Nathan is or isn't, that's what I'm doing first. Claire nodded, turned the heat back up. The garlic's going to burn if we don't. I know. I see it. They cooked dinner. They ate it at the kitchen table and talked about Claire's students and the Meridian Youth Ensemble, and whether Theo was going to try the Debussy at the December concert if Evelyn agreed to it. They did not talk about Nathan for the rest of the evening, which was its own kind of answer about where he currently ranked in the ordering of Evelyn Carter's days. He was there. She was honest enough not to pretend otherwise. But he was not first. And for the first time in 9 years, she was. Lena Cross appeared at a regulatory hearing the first week of November, represented by 2 attorneys and visibly diminished from the woman who had stood in Evelyn's kitchen with a coffee mug and a measuring smile. She gave a formal statement that her attorneys had clearly constructed with care and that contained the specific language of someone who had calculated cooperation as their best available strategy. She did not look in Nathan's direction during the proceeding. Nathan, sitting beside Carolyn Reed at the table reserved for the complainants' party, did not look in hers. He looked briefly at his phone. There was a message from James that said, "How are you holding up?" He typed back, "Fine. Ask me again later." He looked at the room. The institutional furniture, the overhead lighting, the particular acoustics of a space designed for the grinding resolution of disputes, and thought about the fact that this was where 9 months of his life had ended up. The professional catastrophe had a resolution in sight. The personal one did not. Carolyn touched his arm briefly. "We're about to start." He put his phone away. He straightened in his chair. Outside the building's high windows, November was doing what November did. Gray, purposeful. The city stripped of the distractions of pleasanter weather and working now on pure momentum. He thought about Evelyn at a piano somewhere across the city, teaching Gerald about scales and talking Theo through the particular patience the Debussy required, building something patient and real in the way she had always known how to build things when anyone had given her the room to do it. He had not given her the room. He understood that now with a completeness that had no exits and required no further excavation. The hearing began. Nathan Hale sat up straight and paid attention and did his job, which he had always been very good at, even when everything else was falling apart. The settlement with Marcus Voss was finalized on a Tuesday in mid-November, 11 days before the Meridian December concert, and Nathan heard the news in Carolyn Reed's office with the particular flatness of a man who has been waiting for something for so long that its arrival feels less like relief than like the removal of a low-grade noise he had stopped noticing. "Consent order is signed," Carolyn said, sliding the document across the desk. "Regulatory oversight for 5 years, full financial settlement, and a public acknowledgement of the breach." His attorneys fought the acknowledgement language until 48 hours ago. They finally let it go. Nathan read the relevant paragraph. He read it twice, the way he read everything that mattered. "And Lena? Reduced exposure in exchange for her cooperation. She'll face a civil penalty and a permanent bar from working in any capacity involving access to proprietary financial information. Her attorneys negotiated the language carefully enough that it won't follow her into every room she walks into for the rest of her life, but it will follow her into the relevant ones." Carolyn paused. "Nathan, This was a good outcome. For the company, for the record. I know. He set the document down. I know it was. Carolyn looked at him with the steady, professionally tempered attention of someone who had sat across from people in the aftermath of difficult things for 3 decades. The personal situation is a separate matter. Yes. But it's not unrelated to how you're sitting in that chair right now. He looked at her. No, he said. It's not. He called James from the car. James answered with the background noise of what sounded like a school gymnasium. His daughter had a Saturday practice rescheduled to Tuesday afternoon, which was the kind of thing Nathan had registered as a fact about James's life without ever really absorbing what it meant to be the kind of person who rearranged his week around a 12-year-old's soccer schedule. It's done, Nathan said. The settlement. Signed this morning. Good. James was quiet for a moment, and Nathan could hear the distant sound of sneakers on a gym floor, a coach calling something, the ordinary noise of a life with children in it. How do you feel? I feel like I want to tell Evelyn. Then tell her. She has the concert in 11 days. So tell her before the concert. Nathan looked out the car window at the November street. I don't want to put anything on her before the concert. She's been preparing for weeks. I'm not going to walk in with the final chapter of a legal situation and make it about me right before... Nathan! James said it in the way of a person interrupting a rationalization in progress. Is that actually why you're waiting, or are you using the concert as cover because you're not sure what to say? A pause that was longer than Nathan intended. Both, he said. Probably both. At least you know. He sent Evelyn a brief text that evening. The legal matter has resolved. Full settlement, consent order. I'll send you the details through the attorneys so you have the complete picture. I wanted you to know before you heard it elsewhere. He set the phone down and did not wait at it. He had learned, across the past 2 months, that waiting at the phone for Evelyn's response was a habit that belonged to the man he'd been before she left, the man who believed that his desire for a response was sufficient reason for one to arrive. She replied 40 minutes later, "Thank you for letting me know. I'm glad it's resolved." And then, after a pause that showed up in the timestamp, "I heard you're coming to the concert. Marcus mentioned it. That's fine, Nathan. You don't need my permission, but I wanted you to know that I know." He read it 3 times. Then he typed, "I wasn't trying to be covert about it. I should have told you directly. I'm sorry." He sent it and meant both sentences equally. She sent back a single word, "Okay," which was not forgiveness and was not the opposite of it. And he was getting better, slowly, at understanding the difference. Evelyn had said yes to December on the 2nd of November, standing in Marcus's office doorway with her coat still on because she had come in between a teaching session and a call with the Larkspur audio people and hadn't intended to stop for long. "Yes," she said, "December, but I choose the program." Marcus looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who has been hoping for something and is now being careful not to show too much of that hope in case it makes the thing smaller. "Entirely your call. And I'm not doing a retrospective. I'm not doing the greatest hits of what I played before I was married. I want to play 2 pieces I've been working on, original compositions, and 2 classical pieces that I choose." She paused. "And I want Theo in the program. He's been working on the Debussy for 6 weeks. He's ready." "Theo doesn't know he's ready." "I know he's ready. That's enough for now." Marcus nodded. "Done." He reached for his calendar. "We'll need a technical rehearsal the week before. Full sound check. And Evelyn, the press interest from the video hasn't gone away. We're going to have journalists in the audience whether we invite them or not. I want to be transparent about that." "I know." She pulled her coat tighter. "It's fine. I'm not performing for the press. I'm performing because I want to perform." She said it the way you say something when you've thought about it enough that the sentence has become true in your body, not just your head. The Larkspur call happened the following day. The studio's creative director, a woman named Priya Anand, had the particular manner of someone who had been in the music industry long enough to have lost the ability to be impressed by conventional credentials and had replaced it with a genuine interest in the less conventional kind. She asked Evelyn directly about the video, about the 4-year absence, about the original compositions, and she asked follow-up questions that made clear she had actually listened to what Evelyn said rather than waiting for her turn to speak. "The video is what it is," Priya said. "But what interests us isn't the video, it's the two original pieces you mentioned to Marcus. Can you tell me about them?" Evelyn considered how to describe them. She had been working on them for 6 weeks since the third week at Claire's, beginning with fragments she'd written in her head during the hours she'd spent at the piano each morning and gradually developing into actual written scores. One was quiet, built on the specific interval of a minor second, patient, and interior, the kind of piece that asked for a certain quality of attention from a listener rather than demanding it. The other was less settled, structurally more complex, the kind of piece that had an argument running through it. "One is about the difference between silence and quiet," Evelyn said, "and one is it's about what it costs to stop pretending you're fine." A pause on Priya's end. "I want to hear them." "You'll hear the first one at the Meridian concert in December. Then I'll be there." She hung up and sat at Claire's kitchen table with the particular stillness of someone who is trying to take stock of a situation before it becomes something she can't hold still long enough to look at. 6 weeks ago, she had been sleeping in a borrowed bed with a stack of sheet music she hadn't opened in years and a feeling in her chest that was tentative at best. Now she had a teaching schedule she loved, 2 original compositions she believed in, a concert in 11 days, a recording conversation in active progress, and a growing sense, not yet certainty, but something directional, that the life she was assembling was not a temporary arrangement until she figured out what came next. This was what came next. She called Louise that evening. Louise, who had been consistently careful not to ask too many questions, who had been waiting with a patience that Evelyn recognized and was grateful for. "I said yes to the concert," Evelyn said. Louise made a sound that was not quite a word but contained about 40 feelings. "Evelyn, don't make it too big." "It is big. It's one concert at a community arts center. It's the first time you've performed publicly in 4 years. It's big. I'm allowed to say it's big." A pause. "Can I come?" "Obviously, yes." "I'm bringing the boys. Louise, they're teenagers. They're not going to want... They're coming. They can complain in the car. They're coming." Evelyn almost said something dismissive and then didn't, because the truth was that she wanted Louise there with a completeness that surprised her. Not for the performance. The performance was its own thing, self-contained, not requiring an audience she knew personally to validate it. She wanted Louise there because Louise was the person who had known her before Nathan and had never stopped knowing her during Nathan and had been waiting quietly in Philadelphia for Evelyn to show up again. "Come early," Evelyn said. "The youth ensemble is playing first." She did not tell Nathan which piece she was opening with. She didn't tell anyone except Marcus and the sound technician, a practical man named Gus, who treated every performance with the same methodical respect, whether it was a children's recital or a paid professional engagement, which was one of the things Evelyn liked best about Meridian. The rehearsal that week ran long, not because anything went wrong, but because Evelyn kept returning to a passage in the second original piece that wasn't doing what she wanted, a transition between the argument section and the place where the argument resolved into something quieter and more uncertain than resolution. She played it 8 times. On the 9th attempt, she changed a single note in the left hand, and the passage opened up the way a door opens when you've been pushing it from the wrong angle. "There," she said, to no one in particular. Gus looked up from the soundboard. "Was that the one?" That was the one. Theo's rehearsal went better than she had projected, and worse than she had hoped, which was exactly where a 16-year-old should be the week before his first public performance. He played the Debussy through twice, and the second time was significantly better than the first, and after the second time he sat on the piano bench with his hands in his lap and looked at the empty seats of the small performance hall like he was calculating something. "I'm going to mess up the 3rd page," he said. "Probably," Evelyn said. "Most people do. The fingering in bar 32 is genuinely difficult. If you mess it up, you keep going. You don't stop and you don't make a face. You keep going." He looked at her. "What if I really mess it up?" "Then you really keep going." She sat in the chair beside the piano. "Theo, the audience is not going to be listening for what you get wrong. They're going to be listening for what you mean. Those are different things. She paused. Do you know what this piece means to you yet? He thought about it. Theo was not a person who answered questions before he'd actually considered them, which at 16 was rarer than it should have been. It means something about, I don't know, about how things can be pretty and also really sad at the same time, and that's not a contradiction. Yes, Evelyn said. That's exactly it. Play that. He nodded. He did not look entirely convinced that this was an actionable instruction, but he filed it somewhere useful. She drove home to Claire's that night. She had finally rented a car for the week, a small concession to the fact that her life had expanded past what the subway reasonably serviced. And she sat in the car outside Claire's building for 10 minutes before going up. Not because anything was wrong, because she wanted a moment before the evening started, a moment that belonged purely to the space between what the day had been and what the night would be. She had not had those moments for a long time. She was learning to take them. The concert was on a Friday evening in mid-December. The hall at Meridian seated 140 people, and it was full, which Marcus told Evelyn with a particular satisfaction that she recognized as the satisfaction of a person who has believed in something for a long time and is now watching other people arrive at the same belief. There was press, 2 journalists from music publications, 1 reporter from a city culture outlet, and there were strangers who had found the event through the video and bought tickets through the Meridian website. And there was Louise with her 2 teenage sons who had complained in the car and were now sitting in the 4th row looking, against their stated preferences, moderately interested. And there was Claire in the 2nd row with the expression of a person who is trying not to show how proud they are because they don't want to make it about themselves. Evelyn stood in the small backstage area, barely a room really, more of a widened corridor with a mirror and a coat rack, and looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a dark blue dress she had bought herself 3 weeks ago. Not expensive, not the kind of thing Nathan would have selected for her through his stylist. Just a dress she liked in a color she had always preferred when she was left to her own preferences. Her hair was up. She looked like herself. She was getting better at recognizing what that looked like. Marcus appeared at the doorway. 5 minutes. Theo is pacing outside, which I'm told is healthy. It is. Leave him to it. You okay? Yes? She looked at the mirror one more moment. Actually, yes. Marcus left. She heard the audience settling, the specific sound of a room transitioning from social noise to anticipatory quiet, a sound she had loved since she was 9 years old at her first recital and had never stopped finding particular. She breathed in. She breathed out. She was not thinking about Nathan. She was not thinking about the marriage, or the robe, or the legal settlement, or the 47-second video, or the Larkspur call, or any of the accumulations of the past 3 months. She was thinking about bar 32 of the Debussy, and whether Theo would blow through it or get careful at the wrong moment. And she was thinking about the opening interval of her first original piece and how the room would or wouldn't receive it. And she was thinking about her hands. Theo played first. He walked out with the particular stiffness of someone who has been told to walk naturally and is now acutely conscious of walking, and sat at the piano with an adjustment period of about 3 seconds before something in him settled into the music and the self-consciousness dropped away. He played the Debussy. He got to bar 32 and there was a brief, barely perceptible hesitation, not a mistake, just the awareness of the difficulty. And he moved through it. He did not stop. He did not make a face. He played the piece through to its quiet final bar, lifted his hands from the keys, and the room held its silence for just a moment before the applause came. Evelyn watched from the wing and felt something in her chest that was entirely separate from her own performance, and entirely about the fact that 6 weeks ago, this boy had said, "I'm going to mess up the 3rd page," and had just played that 3rd page in front of 140 people and kept going. She walked out for her own set to an audience that already had the warmth of a room that has been given something good and knows it. She sat at the piano. She did not speak. She began. The first original piece, the one about the difference between silence and quiet, landed exactly where she had hoped, which was not with applause but with stillness, the kind of stillness a room produces when it doesn't want to make noise. The second classical piece, the Bach partita she had chosen with specific intention, was familiar enough that the audience could receive it with their whole attention rather than the attention of decoding, and she played it as exactly what it was, a thing of extraordinary construction, mathematical and emotional in equal measure. Between pieces she paused, adjusted her position on the bench. She did not speak to the audience. She did not explain herself. She simply played. The second original composition, the one about what it costs to stop pretending you're fine, was the last piece of the program. She had been slightly afraid of it, not of playing it, but of what it revealed, the specific vulnerability of having written something out of the direct material of your own life, and then performed it in a room full of people who didn't know the source material but might somehow receive the weight of it anyway. She played the opening bars. The argument that ran through the piece asserted itself. She played through the passage that had taken 9 attempts before the single change note had opened it up. She reached the place where the argument gave way to something quieter and more uncertain than resolution, and she played it exactly that way. Uncertain, unresolved in the way that real things are unresolved, honest about the fact that some endings don't arrive cleanly. The final note finished. Her hands came to rest in her lap. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Louise, in the 4th row, started clapping, and the room followed her. And Evelyn sat at the piano with the particular feeling of a person who has put something real into a room and watched the room receive it. He had been in the back row since 5 minutes before the concert started. Nathan had purchased a ticket through the Meridian website under his assistant's name, not to hide from Evelyn, who had known he was coming, but out of the instinct not to occupy space that wasn't his to occupy. He sat in the last row, on the aisle, and he watched 140 people watch his wife perform for the first time in 4 years. And he understood, with the clarity of a man who has spent a long time being wrong about something and is now being corrected, exactly what he had been wrong about. He had known, in the abstract, that Evelyn was talented. He had known it the way you know things about people you love, as a fact about them, categorized and set aside, accessed occasionally when relevant. He had not known it the way the room knew it tonight. He had not known it the way Theo, who was sitting 3 rows ahead of Nathan, with the posture of someone who has just watched a masterclass and is reorganizing everything he believed about what playing actually was, clearly knew it. He had not known it the way the strangers in rows 6 through 12 knew it, people who had found a 47-second video on the internet and had come to a community arts center on a Friday evening because something in that video had been worth following. He had shared a bed and a name and a life with this woman for 9 years, and he had never once given her this room. The second original piece did something to him that he was not prepared for and would not have known how to prepare for. It wasn't the technical quality, though the technical quality was evident even to someone without the vocabulary to describe it. It was the specific emotional argument of the piece itself, the way it built and complicated and then declined to resolve itself neatly. He recognized something in it. He was honest enough not to pretend he didn't. He stayed in his seat after the concert while most of the audience moved toward the small reception area at the back of the hall. He watched people find Evelyn near the piano. Marcus, then Louise with her sons, then Claire, then strangers who wanted to tell her something about the second piece, what it had done to them. He watched her in the room that was now full of evidence of what she was capable of, and she was speaking to people with the particular ease of someone who is inside their right life and knows it. After about 20 minutes, the crowd thinned. Louise's younger son was clearly at the limit of his cultural tolerance, and Louise was managing him with the patient efficiency of long practice. Evelyn saw Nathan across the room and held his gaze for a moment, not with warmth and not without it, just an acknowledgement, a recognition of his presence. He nodded. She nodded back. He made his way across the room when the path was clear. She was accepting the last of the reception conversation, shaking hands with the reporter from the culture outlet, and when that conversation finished, she turned to him with the particular composure that was not distance, but wasn't intimacy either. The composure of someone who has decided in advance how much ground they're standing on. "You were extraordinary," he said. He had said this to her once before, at Hartley's, about the video. This time the word had more behind it because now he had seen it in full. In a room. In real time. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I meant it when I said it was fine." "I know." She glanced across the room to where Louise was attempting to negotiate with her younger son about the timeline for departure. "My sister's here. With the boys." "I saw." He paused. Evelyn, the second piece. She looked at him. There was a specific quality in her expression, not a warning, but an attention. The attention of someone who has put something real into a room and is now considering whether this particular conversation is one she wants to have about it. What about it? She said. I recognized it. He said it simply, without performing the recognition, just naming it. I don't mean I understand everything in it. I mean I recognized what it cost, what you put in there. He paused. I'm not asking you to talk about it. I heard it. And I wanted you to know I heard it. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that he couldn't entirely read, which was not unusual. Evelyn had always had interiority that didn't translate to the surface on request. Thank you, she said. And then, that means something. I'm glad. Louise appeared at Evelyn's elbow with both boys in tow and the expression of a woman executing a graceful extraction. She looked at Nathan with the careful neutrality of someone who has strong opinions they have elected not to share. We should get going. School tomorrow. Of course. Evelyn touched Louise's arm. Thank you for coming. It meant thank you. Louise looked at her in the specific way of two people who have known each other their whole lives and can communicate paragraphs without words, and then she gathered her boys and moved toward the door. Nathan and Evelyn were briefly alone in the thinning room. The piano was behind her, still under the performance lights, the hall settling into its post-concert quiet. The company is stable, he said, not because she had asked, but because she was part of the story and deserved to know its current state. The settlement funds are in. The board is satisfied. Philip thinks the regulatory period will be manageable. Good. She meant it. He had always known that about her, that her feelings about the company were genuinely separate from her feelings about him, that she had never wished him professional ruin in proportion to personal damage. It was one of the things he had failed to adequately account for all those years, the quality of her character. I'm not going to make this into something it's not, he said. Tonight. You played, and it was exceptional, and I'm glad I was here. That's what tonight is. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the right thing to say. I'm working on saying the right thing. I noticed. He put on his coat. Congratulations, Evelyn. On all of it. Not just tonight. He meant the teaching, the video, the Larkspur conversation he had heard about through James, who had heard about it through a chain of connections he hadn't traced closely. He meant the entire 3 months of it. You built something. I know you didn't need my permission or my acknowledgement, but I want to say it anyway. She received it without deflecting it, which was its own kind of answer. Good night, Nathan. Good night. He walked out of the Meridian Arts Center into the December night, the city doing its indifferent December thing, cold, lit, continuous, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment before turning toward where his driver was waiting. The concert hall's light came through the windows behind him. Inside, Marcus was probably already talking to someone about what came next. The February series, the recording conversation, the momentum of a life that was now clearly in motion. He had sat in the back row for 80 minutes and watched 140 people discover what he had failed to see for 9 years, and the discovery had not been comfortable and had not been meant to be. He was not a man who had earned comfort. He was at present a man who had earned the right to sit in a back row and witness something true about someone he had failed to pay attention to, and to leave when it was over without asking for more than he had been given. He got in the car. His driver, a quiet man named Roy, who had driven him for 6 years and had the professional grace never to ask questions, pulled away from the curb. Home, Mr. Hale? Nathan looked out the window. The city moved past. Yes, he said. Home. He sat with the second piece all the way across town, the shape of its argument, the way it had declined to resolve, the specific note in the left hand that opened the passage up. He did not know what Evelyn had meant by every measure of it, but he knew what it had cost her to play it in a room full of people. He knew because he had watched her face during it, not from the back row, where he couldn't see clearly, but in the moment just before she began, when he had briefly, unexpectedly, had an unobstructed view of her at the piano in the moment between preparation and beginning. That moment when you have decided to do the real thing, and you are holding the decision, and the music is still inside you, and nothing has yet gone wrong. She had looked, in that moment, completely like herself. Nathan Hale had spent 9 years in the company of that face and had never fully understood until a Friday evening in December, sitting in the back row of a community arts center he had never visited before, exactly what he had been looking at. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in late January, slipped under the door of Claire's apartment while Evelyn was at Meridian teaching the adult beginners. Claire found it when she came home between classes. It was a plain envelope, cream-colored, Nathan's handwriting on the front. Not a courier, not his assistant's doing, not something processed through a legal intermediary, just his handwriting and Evelyn's name. Claire set it on the kitchen table and sent Evelyn a text that said simply, "There's something here for you, no rush." Evelyn came home at noon, still in her coat, and stood at the kitchen table looking at the envelope for a moment before sitting down. She had not spoken to Nathan since the concert 3 weeks ago. The good night they had exchanged in the thinning hall at Meridian had felt complete in itself. Not a door closing, but a door at rest. She had not known what, if anything, came after it. She opened the envelope. There were 4 pages, handwritten, the same hand that had signed 1,000 contracts and written exactly 2 personal letters in the time she had known him. One when they were first together, one on their 5th anniversary that had been beautiful and had also arrived via his assistant's courier service in a branded envelope, which had said something she had chosen at the time not to hear. These pages were different. She could tell from the first line. Evelyn. I've started this letter 6 times in the past 3 weeks and thrown away 5 versions because they were all, in different ways, still trying to manage the situation. I'm going to try to write this one without managing anything. She read it at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. She read it once, straight through, and then she set it down and looked out the window for a while. Then she picked it up and read it again. It was not a perfect letter. That was the first thing she registered clearly. There were sentences that reached for poetry and fell short of it, a paragraph midway through that began explaining and caught itself and redirected, a passage near the end that was simply a man sitting with what he had done and not trying to make it smaller or larger than it was. There was no request in it, not explicit. He did not ask her to come back or to forgive him or to give him another chance. He wrote about the 9 years with a specificity that she recognized as costing him something, because Nathan Hale did not typically narrate his failures in detail. He wrote about the robe. He wrote about the dinner parties and the mornings with the phone and the anniversary flowers he had sent through someone else. He wrote, I have spent my entire adult life being very good at acquisition. I acquired you, and I treated you like an acquisition, and I did not understand the difference between having someone and actually being with them. And by the time I understood it, you were already gone. Not the night you left, long before that. I just wasn't paying attention. He wrote about watching her play at Meridian, not the technical quality of it, not the response of the room. He wrote about the moment before she began, when he had had an unobstructed view of her face in the space between preparation and playing. You looked like yourself. Completely. I have been trying to remember the last time I saw that, and I can't find it, and that is entirely on me. The last page was the shortest. I am not writing this because I expect anything from it. I'm writing it because you deserve to have someone take complete responsibility for what happened without attaching a request to it. Consider this that. The rest is yours to decide, on whatever timeline belongs to you, or not at all. Either way, I needed you to know that I understand what I lost, not what I lost from my life. What I lost, you, specifically, the person you are, and that those are not the same thing. She folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. She sat at Claire's kitchen table in her coat in the January light and thought about 9 years, not all at once, but in the specific way memories come when you stop managing them. Fragments, textures, the quality of particular mornings and evenings, and the silences between them. She thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of the marriage, how certain she had been that love was a sufficient foundation for anything, how gradually that certainty had eroded into the practiced optimism of someone who has decided not to look too directly at what is happening. She thought about Gerald playing his G major scale with the expression of pure, uncomplicated delight. She thought about Theo in bar 32, the barely perceptible hesitation, the decision to keep going. She thought about Priya Anand saying what interests us isn't the video and meaning it. She thought about the note in the left hand that had opened the passage up on the 9th attempt. She picked up her phone and called Louise. Louise picked up on the second ring. "Hey, everything okay?" "Nathan sent a letter." A pause. "What kind of letter?" "The real kind." Evelyn looked at the envelope on the table. "He didn't ask for anything. He said what he needed to say and didn't attach conditions to it." Another pause. Louise was a person who thought before she spoke, which was one of the reasons Evelyn called her, rather than the other way around on the things that mattered. "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "That's honest. I genuinely don't know yet." "That's okay. I keep trying to decide what I feel, and I can't get a clean answer." She looked out the window. Which might be the answer, actually. If it were clearly no, I would know. If it were clearly yes, I would know. So it's something in between. It's something in between. She paused. "I'm not the same person I was when I left, Lou. I need you to understand that when I say I'm thinking about this. I am not considering going back to what it was. What it was doesn't exist anymore, and I don't want it back." "I know. If there were a conversation to have, and I'm not saying there is, I'm saying if, it would be about something entirely new, with rules that I set, with my career being what it is, not a nice addition to someone else's life." "Yes," Louise said. "Obviously, yes. And there's no guarantee it would work. He might be a genuinely different person, or he might be a person who has been badly frightened and will revert to form once the fear fades." She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands. "I don't know which one he is yet." "Does he know which one he is?" Evelyn thought about that. "I think he's trying to find out." She sat with it for the rest of January. She did not respond to the letter immediately. Not out of strategy, but because she was genuinely uncertain, and she had made a commitment to herself, in the weeks since she had left, to stop performing certainty she didn't have. The old Evelyn had been very good at deciding what she felt on behalf of the situation, and then feeling that, efficiently and with minimal disruption to the larger order of things. She was done with that. The Larkspur recording project became official in early February. Priya Anand came to Meridian in the first week of the month, sat through a full rehearsal of the 2 original compositions, and left with her notebook full and the expression of someone who has confirmed what they suspected and is now thinking about how to proceed. The contract came through the following week. Modest advance, creative control retained by Evelyn on all original compositions, a 6-month timeline for the debut record that Priya described as achievable if we don't overthink it and catastrophic if we do. Evelyn signed it at Claire's kitchen table with a pen she had to borrow from Claire, which felt appropriate. Marcus framed a copy of the signed first page and hung it in his office doorway, which Evelyn told him was excessive and which she secretly found exactly right. She had moved into her own apartment by then, a 2-bedroom on the Upper West Side, 12 blocks from Meridian, with good light and a room large enough for a proper upright piano, which she had purchased used from a musician who was relocating and had to move it quickly. The building had a service elevator that barely fit the piano and a super named Frank, who had strong opinions about the logistics and turned out to be correct about all of them. She had carried her own boxes. She had arranged the furniture herself, badly at first, and then better on the second attempt. She had hung her parents' photographs on the wall above the piano and put the wooden box her mother had given her on the bookshelf, and put the sheet music, all of it, the Chopin and the Bach, and her own compositions and the teaching materials, in a low bookcase she had assembled herself on a Sunday afternoon with a set of instructions that were either in the wrong language or written by someone with a different concept of what an Allen wrench was for. She had slept in her own apartment on the first night, in her own bed with her own sheets, and the feeling in her chest that had begun as something tentative on the sidewalk of East 74th was now simply steady. It was steady. Not happiness in the bright declarative sense, something more durable than that. The feeling of a person who has come back to themselves after a long and unnecessary absence and found to their surprise that the self in question had been waiting without reproach. She called Nathan in the 3rd week of February. He picked up on the second ring, and there was something in the quality of his hello, a restraint, the careful register of someone who is not going to assume anything from the fact of the call, that told her the letter had genuinely cost him something and that he had not sent it as a move. "I got your letter," she said. "I know, yes. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. I know that too." A pause. "I wasn't expecting a response. I meant that." "I know you meant it. That's part of why I'm calling." She was standing at her kitchen window, looking out at the February street, the bare trees, the gray particular to that month that was different from every other gray the city produced. "I'm not calling to tell you yes or no to anything. I want to be clear about that. I don't have a yes or a no. Okay? But I think there might be a conversation worth having, not about the past. We've covered the past. About whether there's anything possible going forward that isn't just a worse version of what we had before." She paused. "And I need you to understand before we have that conversation that my life is not available to be organized around yours again. I have a record in production. I have a teaching schedule I love. I have an apartment of my own that I'm keeping regardless of whatever is decided about anything else. Those things are not negotiable, and they're not temporary." "I understand. I'm not finished." She turned from the window. "I need you to understand that I will not disappear again. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not because it's easier to be the person in the background of someone else's important life. If there is ever a moment in whatever we do going forward where I feel myself going quiet, in that way, that particular way, I'm going to say so, and I'm going to need you to hear it, not manage it. Hear it." A long pause. "Yes," he said, and then, "I hear you. Right now, this moment, I hear you." "Good." She picked up her coffee from the counter. "Come to Meridian next Tuesday at 3. Marcus is letting me use the hall for an hour to work on the third composition. You can sit and listen, that's all. Just listen." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because I want to see what it's like to have you in the room when I'm working, not performing. Working with all the mistakes and the false starts and the going back to fix things." She paused. "If you can be in a room like that and actually be present, not patient, not indulgent, actually present, then maybe we have something worth talking about. And if I can't, then we'll know that too." He came on Tuesday at 3. He arrived 5 minutes early and sat in the third row, not the back. Evelyn was already at the piano when he arrived, working through a passage she had been trying to resolve for 2 weeks, and she acknowledged his arrival with a brief nod and then went back to what she was doing. She played the passage through. It didn't work. She tried it again from 4 bars back. It still didn't work. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and then tried a structural change that altered the harmonic sequence in the first half of the passage, which meant going back even further. And she played it through from the top of that section, and this time something in the architecture of it shifted in the right direction. Not completely, not finished, but pointing somewhere better. She made a note on the score. She looked up. Nathan was sitting in the third row with his coat on and his hands in his lap, and his full, unqualified attention on her. Not the polite attention of a person managing themselves through an experience they're enduring, the actual kind. The kind she had first seen from him 23 years ago at a bar in the West Village, when he had talked with her until closing time and had seemed, impossibly, to be genuinely interested in everything she said. She turned back to the piano. She worked for another 40 minutes. He said nothing. When she finally set down her pencil and closed the score, the room was quiet in the particular way of a room where work has happened. "The harmonic shift in the second section," he said, "the one you fixed about 20 minutes in. That changed the whole feeling of it." She looked at him. "You heard that?" "I don't have the vocabulary for it, but I heard something settle." He paused. "Like a room when someone opens a window." She sat with that for a moment. It was not a musician's observation. It was a person's observation, someone who had been listening with their full attention and had found their own language for what they received. It was not impressive in the way Nathan was usually impressive, not strategic or polished or professionally calibrated. It was just true. "Okay," she said. They began slowly. This was, by Evelyn's deliberate design, the only available speed. They had coffee twice in February, dinner once in early March at a restaurant she chose in a neighborhood that wasn't associated with their marriage. They talked the way people talk when they are paying attention to the talking itself, carefully, with pauses that were allowed to be pauses rather than silences to fill. Nathan made mistakes, not catastrophic ones, but the ordinary mistakes of a man trying to learn a different way of being with someone. Moments where the old instinct toward management surfaced, where he started to arrange the conversation rather than inhabit it, and she would simply stop responding in the particular way that made clear the conversation had gone somewhere she wasn't going with him. He got better. Not perfectly, not linearly. There were evenings that ended with more tension than they had started with, conversations where Evelyn drove home to her apartment on the Upper West Side and sat in her kitchen for 20 minutes trying to determine whether what had happened was navigable friction or a genuine signal. Sometimes it was one thing, sometimes the other, and she was honest with herself about the difference, even when the difference was uncomfortable. Claire watched all of this with the careful attention of a longtime friend who has a full set of opinions and knows which ones to keep to herself. She offered, exactly once, a direct assessment. He's trying. That's real. Whether trying is enough is a different question, and only you can answer it. I know, Evelyn said. The question I'd ask, Claire said, is not whether you love him. You do, some version of it, or you wouldn't be having coffee with him on Tuesday mornings. The question is whether the life you'd have with him going forward is a life that you can be fully inside, not accommodating yourself to, actually inside. Evelyn thought about that question for a long time. She thought about it during her morning hours at the piano. She thought about it during the Tuesday and Thursday teaching sessions, watching Gerald progress from scales to a simple piece by Bartók he had requested with the cheerful audacity of someone who doesn't yet know what he's taking on. She thought about it during the recording sessions at Larkspur, where Priya had the gift of knowing when to speak and when to stay out of the way, and the recorded versions of the original compositions were becoming something that surprised Evelyn each time she played back the tracks, more fully themselves than she had expected, more honest. The record was finished in April. Priya played her the final master in the studio's listening room, just the two of them, on a Wednesday afternoon when the city outside was doing the tentative, uncertain thing it does when spring is arriving and not quite committed to it yet. Evelyn sat in the listening chair with her hands in her lap and heard the two original compositions played back in the quality they were meant to exist in, and the second one, the one about what it costs to stop pretending you're fine, sounded like it had been made by someone who had already paid that cost and come out somewhere real on the other side. It's good, Evelyn said when it finished. Priya was quiet for a moment. It's better than good. But you already know that. Evelyn did know. She sat with the knowledge without deflecting it, which was its own kind of progress. She told Nathan about the finished record over dinner in late April at her apartment, the first time she had had him to her space rather than meeting on neutral ground, which was not nothing, and both of them knew it. She cooked, which went moderately well, and they ate at her table with the piano visible from where they sat, and her parents' photographs on the wall and the wooden box on the bookshelf, and it was, Evelyn thought, the most genuinely domestic evening they had ever spent together, because it was entirely hers, and she had chosen to let him into it. The record comes out in June, she said. Priya mentioned she was pleased with how it came out. You talked to Priya? She called me about a venue question for the release event. I told her I'd look into it and I'd get back to her. He paused. I should have mentioned she called. I defaulted to just handling it. Old habit. Evelyn looked at him. This was the thing. This was the precise texture of the work that was still ongoing. Not the large betrayals, those were accounted for, but the accumulated reflex of a man who had spent his whole life solving things on behalf of other people without asking them first. Did you handle it? I gave her 3 venue options and told her the choice was entirely hers and yours. Okay. She picked up her fork. Next time, mention it to me first. Yes, he said. You're right. They ate for a moment in the comfortable, slightly complicated silence of two people who are learning each other again after having believed, wrongly, that they already had. Nathan, she set her fork down, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just hear it. He put his own fork down and gave her his attention, Complete, no reservation in it. I've spent a lot of time over the past 7 months trying to figure out what I actually feel versus what I think I should feel, or what would be easier to feel. She looked at him steadily. And what I actually feel is that I love you. Still. In spite of everything. I'm not happy about it in some abstract sense because it would have been cleaner not to. But it's what's true, and I'm not in the business of pretending things aren't true anymore. He was very still. What I also feel, she continued, is that I am not the woman who left East 74th in October. She was good, but she was disappearing. I'm not going to disappear again, and any future we have, if we have one, has to be built on a version of us that doesn't require me to be smaller than I am. She paused. Can you do that? Not as a promise you make tonight, as a real question about who you actually are now versus who you were. He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was thinking about it honestly rather than reaching for the answer she wanted. I don't know if I can do it perfectly, he said. I know that's not the answer you want, but the honest answer is that I spent 51 years being a specific kind of person, and I'm in the middle of trying to become a different one, and I can't promise you I won't make mistakes in the direction of the old one. He met her eyes. What I can tell you is that I will hear you when you say you're disappearing. I will actually hear it. Not manage it. Not explain why you shouldn't feel it. Hear it and change whatever needs to change. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the right answer, she said. Not because it's what I wanted, because it's true. They did not move back in together. This was Evelyn's requirement, and she stated it cleanly, and Nathan agreed without argument. Her apartment was hers, his was his, and whatever they were rebuilding would be rebuilt from separate foundations rather than from the assumed continuity of a shared address. They spent time together, the way people spend time together when they have chosen to, rather than because geography and a shared mortgage have made the choice for them. It felt different. It felt like choosing. There were still hard evenings. There was a night in May when a business dinner ran until 11, and Nathan called at 10:45 with the particular phone manner of someone who has been in professional mode for 8 hours and has not yet decompressed into the person he is outside of it. And the conversation went badly, and Evelyn hung up and sat in her kitchen and wrote for an hour. Not music, just her thoughts in a journal she had started keeping in November. And by the time she closed the journal, she knew the evening was navigable. That was the difference. She knew the difference now between something navigable and something that wasn't, and she trusted herself to know. He sent a text at midnight. That conversation was me being bad at transitioning. I'm sorry. Not asking for anything tonight, just saying so. She read it and went to sleep and called him in the morning, and they talked for 20 minutes in the easy way they had been relearning, and that was that. The record release was in June. Priya had chosen a small venue in downtown Manhattan, the kind of place with good acoustics and dark wood and no pretension about what it was, and the evening had the quality of something that had been assembled with care rather than orchestrated with strategy. The 2 original compositions were played live, accompanied by a cellist named Andre, whom Evelyn had met through Marcus and who had an instinct for collaboration that made the playing feel like a conversation. Theo was in the audience with his parents, in the front row, wearing a jacket that looked borrowed. Gerald was there too, near the middle, with his wife, and when Evelyn walked out to the piano, she saw him in the second-to-last bar of her peripheral vision and found, again, that she had to look briefly away. Louise was there with her husband this time, without the boys, and they sat with Claire and Marcus and Priya and a collection of people who represented the various threads of the life Evelyn had been assembling since October. Students, colleagues, the music journalist who had come to Meridian in December and had written a piece that described the second original composition as the sound of someone deciding to be honest in real time and pulling it off. Nathan sat in the 4th row. Not the back. He had stopped sitting in the back. She played. She played the way she had learned over the past 8 months, to play when she wasn't performing for approval or managing an audience's expectations. Just making the thing as fully itself as she knew how, and trusting that was enough. The first original piece landed in the room the way it always landed when played right, creating a stillness that felt voluntary. The second piece, which had been written out of the direct material of what she had survived, came out that evening with a quality it had not always had in earlier performances. The argument in it sounded less like grief and more like the record of a decision that had already been made and had already turned out to be the right one. When it finished, the room held its silence for exactly the right amount of time. Here is what nobody tells you about the life you build after the one you thought you were living falls apart. It is not a consolation prize. It is not the lesser version of the thing you lost. It is, if you are willing to do the actual work of building it, rather than simply rearranging the rubble of what came before. Something more specifically yours than anything you had when you were too busy accommodating other people's gravity to find your own. Evelyn Carter was 53 years old in June of that year. She had spent 9 years in a marriage that had asked her to be smaller than she was, and had discovered, only when she stopped complying, how much of herself had been quietly waiting. She had learned something that most people learn in theory and only some learn in practice, that leaving a thing is not the same as failing at it. Sometimes the most honest response to a life that has stopped fitting is to walk out of it with your suitcase and your sheet music and the specific clarity of someone who has stopped telling herself stories, and to let whatever is true be simply, stubbornly true. She had also learned something harder and less convenient, that people can change, not easily, not completely, not without cost. But the change Nathan Hale was in the middle of was real, in the way that things are real when they are born out of genuine loss rather than strategic recalculation. She was not naive about this. She had eyes, and she used them, and she had learned to trust what she saw over time rather than what she was told in a single conversation. What she had seen, across 8 months of careful, uncomfortable, incremental truth-telling, was a man trying to become someone worth being, not for her approval, but because he had finally understood what he had actually been. That was not nothing. She had never pretended it was nothing. What she had also insisted on, and would continue to insist on, was that it was not enough on its own. Change people still had to show up differently across time. Good intentions were preamble, not proof. She would hold him to that. She would hold herself to the version of herself that had been rebuilt in those months. The one who said what she meant, and kept the piano and told Louise the truth, and drove home to her own apartment, and made her own coffee in the morning, in her own kitchen with her own hands, and did not apologize for any of it. After the performance, after the room had released its held breath and filled with applause, and then with the particular noise of a crowd that has been moved and is now processing it in the social way of crowds, Nathan found her near the back of the venue. He did not push through the people who wanted to speak with her. He waited until the cluster thinned. He had learned to wait. "The piece resolved differently tonight," he said when she reached him. "I know, I felt it. The ending. It wasn't unresolved the way it usually is." She looked at him. "No," she said. "I think it resolved." He understood what she meant, and she could see that he understood, and she let him have that. The understanding, the fact of it. The small and imperfect and real thing of two people who had come through something hard and were standing on the other side of it with a realistic view of what the other side actually looked like. It didn't look like before. It wasn't supposed to. Before had been a certain kind of beautiful and a certain kind of careless, and it was finished the way things are finished when they have been genuinely over for long enough that there is no version of pretending otherwise. What existed now was something they had not had before, a clear-eyed accounting, a set of conditions she had named and he had accepted, a pair of people who had stopped lying to each other and to themselves and were finding out, slowly and without guarantee, what was possible in that honesty. "Come have a drink with us," she said. "Marcus is going to talk for 45 minutes, and Claire is going to interrupt him every 8, and Louise is going to try to get Priya to explain the music industry to her husband, who has no interest in the music industry." She looked at him. "It'll be imperfect, and a little loud, and not a venue where you'll be the most impressive person in the room." He almost smiled. "Is that a condition?" "It's a description." She moved toward the group. "Come on." He followed her. And that, the following, the willingness to be present in a room that didn't require him to be the center of it, to occupy a normal human amount of space in someone else's good evening, was not the ending of the story, because real things don't have endings in the tidy sense. They just have the next moment and then the one after that. But it was something. It was two people choosing, with full knowledge of what they were choosing and what it had cost to get here, to walk toward the same room. That is, in the end, what any of us can offer another person. not a promise that we will always be the version of ourselves we mean to be, but the daily, unglamorous, entirely human act of trying, and the willingness to hear the truth when we fall short of it. Evelyn Carter had learned that the hard way. She had lost herself once inside a life that asked too much of her silence. She would not lose herself again. And she had decided, with the same clarity she brought to the left hand of a difficult composition, that this, all of it, the rebuilt life and the honest man and the imperfect ongoing work of two people in the same room, was worth the trying. Not because it was perfect, because it was true.